Well, welcome y'all to our June Homes for All Coalition meeting. So we're just gonna start with check-ins. How are you feeling today, 1 to 10? Today we're color. What color would it be? And I don't know if we've done this one before, but your first job. And I could kick us off. I'm feeling like a 9. I feel pretty good. I took like a half-hour break before this meeting, went on a walk and listened to the audiobook I'm listening to. That was a lot of fun. And my color is like an ocean blue. And my first job was in my dad's friend's restaurant, Sawadi, which was on the northwest side when I was like 13 or 14, bussing tables. It was definitely an experience. It's like a tiny restaurant, all kinds of moving pieces, and I'm like very antisocial. So like, yeah, so that was good. And I will pass it to Beth.
Thank you. Beth, let's see. Color is yellow today. And I'd say, I'm in the upswing of recovery from COVID day 4 or 5. So I'm feeling pretty good given that. I'd have to say that I can't believe you're antisocial, but that's okay.
Back then, this was like in middle school. Like,
Okay.
I would not want to talk to people. I just refill the glasses, not even want to get the plates, just try and set up the tables. Like,
Okay, my first job, well, legitimate, I suppose, as opposed to, I don't know what illegitimate meant in that case, but
under the
anyway, I
table.
sold
Call it
donuts.
under the table.
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts. Yes, I was your Dunkin' Donut girl. I think that covers it. Let's see, I'll pass it on to Pambana.
Hi, everybody. So sunlight, white, 9, and my first job was our dad. We had a landscaping business, and my dad would take me and my brother out to different people's yards, and we would cut their grass and trim it and all those kind of things. And I think we were maybe either about 12, 13, about that age, somewhere in there. And then I'll pass it to Jim.
All right. So I am sky blue, not a cloud in the sky blue. And I am 8.5. And my first job was also just after I turned 13. And it was a summer camp at the middle school I had just finished up at. And so I was sort of a junior counselor for that summer day camp. It's a day camp.
Nice.
Did you enjoy that, Jim? Trying to keep the kids in line?
I did. It was the first of many jobs and many volunteer things in which I work with kids who are younger than myself. And yeah, I did that through college at least, and even right before I went to law school, I volunteered at an orphanage in Tijuana. And that was a great way to get ready for law school, was just push kids on swings. It was awesome.
Nice. Well, we have a very informal agenda today, which is just to open the floor for sharing. So we want to create this space to be a place to share learning. So like Beth already shared before we got started, some stuff your church is doing with Habitat. So anything that people want to share or questions, just to talk about what's going on with housing, Indianapolis, Indiana, whatever y'all want to share. Jim, you want to share anything about what's going on up in South Bend?
Well, I am going to try to find out a little bit more about what is happening with South Bend and see what the latest is. But I have not been in touch with them this semester. I'm a little more in touch with the folks in Bloomington because they have been active with us. But I think both groups are proceeding, and I don't know if South Bend may have already closed on its first home, but it's probably getting close to. probably closing on its first homes. It hasn't already done so. That's probably what's going on with them. And so I think their interest in some of the questions that you're facing with Marion County are going to be just as strong up here with St. Joseph County, especially the property tax issues.
Yeah, and what's Bloomington, and I think South Bend, I've heard, I think is closing on their first home maybe in the next month.
That's great to hear. I'm glad you guys know about that. Yeah, so Bloomington is definitely coming out of the Bloomington Cooperative Living organization movement. And they want to do something a little more, something a little different that may go beyond the Bloomington Cooperative Living focus on student housing to something a little more longer term and something that may involve ownership and possibly single family. But right now they seem to be, I've identified a few small multifamily properties and then another vacant lot where they might want to build, again, a small number unit multifamily property. And they're not ruling out other single family home possibilities, but those small multifamily units. And so it'll be interesting to see what they want to do as far as ownership of that. I think it's quite possible that they'll end up saying that the whole thing will be just owned by the land trust, and there'll be some kind of resident controlled long-term rental thing designed to emulate a co-op in terms of especially in terms of control, but maybe in terms of some equity stake too, because you can do things even in an MHA to somewhat emulate equity investment resident
And
control.
what's MHA?
MHA is a mutual housing association. It's kind of a resident controlled nonprofit landlord. So it doesn't get used a lot, but it's one way of thinking of a co-op that doesn't have any equity in it at all. And there's many of the co-ops in New York City, for instance, that are low-income co-ops are pretty much zero equity co-ops. They're basically, you get your security deposit back when you leave, but no one's going to ask you, no one's going to force you out as long as you pay your rent and obey the rules, you know, and you can even pass the apartment on like you can do with rent stabilized apartments. But you know, the control is the thing. It's not about the chance to really see it as a source of wealth for you.
And the
It's not say you can't do that in Indiana, because there are some market rate co-ops in Indiana, and they have a different approach, but they're really closer in some ways to condominiums, you know.
And the Bloomington group that's coming out of cooperatives, what's their impetus for wanting to do community land trusts?
They really are very strongly committed to permanent affordability. So like many land trusts that are in academic areas, there's a strong philosophical attraction to the principles of the land trust movement. And so that's part of it. With these co-ops, when you do have resident controlled co-ops, there is the possibility that the residents themselves might try to take it private, might try to take it market co-op. That was a concern for some co-ops in New York and the ones we did in DC. And so the land trust in some ways acts as an additional backstop to sort of hold the residents who do control the property accountable to the long-term affordability goals. And in that sense, it's like the ground lease that you have with the single family homeowner, that you're going to hold that single family homeowner accountable to the proper use of the property while they own it, as well as when they choose to move on and sell it. So yeah, I'm hoping to get to know a little bit more details of what they want to do with the properties they have in mind in the next few weeks. But they have joined in with the folks from South Bend to sort of share information. But it's really interesting. I don't know if I told you this. I did tell you right before I presented to the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis board. They were very excited to hear that they were somewhat familiar with that Indianapolis was moving forward, and even Bloomington, but they were excited to hear that South Bend and Indianapolis and Bloomington were all moving forward with community land trust, and that Indianapolis bank does have Michigan in its territory as well. So they were aware of some things just over the border from here, up in I think Benton Harbor. So and again, a real it's almost like the Flint of Western Michigan in some ways. It's a real struggling community. Not too different from Michigan City in that way, but heavily African American, and so the idea that they're doing community land trust may also be something, and also in an initial stage that might be worth getting to know a little bit more.
Good stuff.
So yeah, that actually may be a connection worth following up on, is the Federal Home Loan Bank board. Since they are headquartered right there in Indianapolis, you can find out what they do currently with rental housing and home ownership. The home ownership seems to be down payment assistance, but even down payment assistance could be an important part of how the package gets together for your single family home owners. So knowing how they do that may be helpful, because you may have, if you're like a typical nonprofit affordable home developer, you may have like 5 or 6 different sources that make it all work. So having more friends is great.
Absolutely. And at the Federal Home Loan Bank, is there a contact you'd recommend?
Yeah, no, I definitely can put you in touch with Lindsay Miller, since she was my main contact. And then, yes, we can follow up from there and see what happens. So it just went really well. And I think I was very grateful that I had something to say about Indiana, especially for them, especially since community land trusts had not been active in Indiana 5 years ago even.
Yeah, so no, that'd be great. Yeah, if you could send an intro to you said Kelly.
So yes, Lindsay. Yeah, Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Lindsay Miller. Yeah, Lindsay with a Y, or 2 Ys. Y early on and Y at the end. Yeah.
Sounds great. And yeah, we'll have her over for lunch sometime.
Yeah, sure. That might be great. That'd be great.
Well, I'll share a little bit about some of the updates and legal stuff that we're working on here in Indianapolis, particularly around the tax thing. That's one of the open items right now.
Hey, and Alvin, you also share update in the context of Inglewood and their houses in the CLT as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one piece we're working on with the Department of Metropolitan Development, and particularly the folks that work with CDBG Community Development Block Grants and home funds, the federal home program, the 2 main funding sources for affordable housing in addition to low-income housing tax credits. So we've been talking with them, particularly in reference to a project that they committed to fund Inglewood CDC to create some homes for the CLT. So that's really the first project that we're looking at developing in partnership with Inglewood CDC. So there just been some details that we were working out through Jason at Webb at Ground Solutions about the technicalities. Particularly, one thing that we've learned is that we're going to have to use a ground lease. Originally, we were thinking maybe a deed restriction, since the tax issue is kind of in question, up in the air about how to do that. But based off of some HUD regulations that we found more in detail, in order to get home funds, you have to be conformed to a more classic CLT model, which involves a ground lease as well as an independent 501c3 and a tripartite board, or working toward that. So that's kind of been a new piece, is that we are reopening the piece on the ground lease and how to do that and how the taxation will work. And really, there's two things that we're thinking through, right? We're trying to talk with our assessor, Marion County assessor and auditor about, which is about the homestead exemption. Because it's kind of a question up in the air, whether a ground lease CLT homeowner would qualify for a homestead or not, even if it's their primary residence. So that's kind of a legal question up in the air. And then second is about fair taxation. So just trying to get some agreement with the auditor and assessor that they won't assess the property over the resale. So there's going to be like the ground lease, which restricts how much they can sell it for. So if they can only sell it for $100,000, their property taxes shouldn't be based on $200,000. So these are kind of the two things we're trying to work out, hopefully over the next couple of weeks with the assessor's office. So that's really that's where that is at. We're trying to figure that piece out.
That's great. And what I can tell you is that my recollection of the original home legislation was that the definition of community land trust was a way that a nonprofit affordable housing developer could become a CHODO. But it was just sort of a shortcut, for lack of a better word, sort of almost a guarantee that they would be considered a CHODO if they met, as you say, the classic definition of it. And then the tripartite board, as I recall, was part of that because the CHODO definition required community participation on the board, as I recall. And so it is true that maybe the community land trust model under the regs also now has said the ground lease is an important part of it. It seems strange to me that if state law allowed a different mechanism for affordability, that long-term affordability, you would have to be a ground lease. But in any case, the fact is that it still may be the only way. I really do believe the ground lease will be the best way for you to actually, assuming the Inglewood properties are going to be single family homes. And that does it seem like the way you're going to do is that each house will be on its own lot? Is that the way?
That's the plan now, is that they're going to be separately parceled.
Yes. Yeah, and I do think the ground lease will be the best way for you to get the affordability in the long term. But I just want to make sure that the CLT definition in the federal thing, it is, I recall, it is just one way for a nonprofit. And the fact that a nonprofit calls itself a land trust does not mean it's the only way that such an organization can become a CHODO. But the general definition of CHODO does have its own set of requirements and maybe a longer and maybe a more uncertain process. So there may be advantages to taking it. And my information may be out of date, that for some, I just can't imagine, since there are, I would say 90% of CHODOs are not community land trusts at all. So, the idea that you have to be a specific kind of community land trust doesn't really wash. And I do believe Inglewood probably already is a CHODO.
Yeah.
But
and for those who don't know, CHODO is Community Housing Development Organization.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that is key to unlocking home funds. It's in many ways a wonderful thing that with low-income housing tax credits going to organizations that tend to be larger and have very strong relationships to Fortune 500 companies in order to make tax credit rental property work, that home funds have always been specifically targeted at community-based nonprofit developers, often that operate at a neighborhood scale. And so that has been a real lifeline for now over 30 years for those organizations, like the ones that are part of this call frequently. But I think we can try. I'm glad there's still some impetus to try to, especially, I wouldn't want to tell the city what I just told you, because they seem to be the ones really kind of wishing the ground lease would just go away. And I don't think there's any need for that, nor is there any need for any kind of special state legislation to ease its use. in Indiana, but I'm willing to sort of work to show why that's the case. And I understand that hasn't happened just yet, even on the property tax issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think anything that really tries to make the argument with like exact, real estate, what does the real estate regulations in Indiana say, and taxation laws that would say, hey, ground lease is fine. Or
Yeah, and so
homestead should qualify or something.
right.
Is
The
kind of what
basic
we're
principle
thinking.
operate is that property tax law doesn't get to say whether arrangements are fine or not. They just have to figure out how to tax them. And innovation in property may run up against other sources of law that says, no, you really can't be creative in that way with property. That is a thing. It's just not a property tax thing. And so property tax law doesn't generally get to decide what forms of ownership you can have. It can just say, okay, this is a form of ownership we've not seen before, but because the law allows it, we have to figure out now how to make it work with our computer systems. And you could see, for very good reason, they would wish such things would go away, because they have a system that works and they don't want to have to innovate to make fit your little square peg into their sets of round holes.
Yeah, and one of the hangups has been a fear that they'll have to separate the land from the housing to tax them separately. But
Yes.
what we're trying to say, and Jason's argument, is that the ground lease says that the homeowner is responsible for the taxes on the land and the house. So you don't even need to create separate parcels, just put their name on it. And then
and that's fine too. The problem with that is that private agreements don't decide who is responsible for the taxes. We can't say by private agreement, this person is the one the state has to charge for the tax. The state property tax laws do decide who is primarily liable for it, and you can't change that by agreement. Jason's not wrong that parties can say that even if the land trust is primarily responsible for paying the taxes, the owner can promise to pay them and make sure that gets paid. That you can do, but that doesn't change the fact that the land trust is still the one the bill goes to. So private agreements don't change who gets billed. But I understand Jason's logic there, but it probably won't work with the folks in the property tax world.
So would you do it the other way, where you have the CLT on all the on the hook for the property taxes if they can list one?
That's a good question. It could be that way, especially if the ground lease fee is collecting all that money anyway. That's one way to make sure the bills get paid. Banks often, mortgage lenders are often the ones that pay property taxes anyway. And so to the extent the ground lease is just as concerned about the owner staying current on property taxes as the lender, the mortgage lender, is in all situations, it might be fine for the CLT to make sure they're being paid by paying them just the way mortgage lenders pay. The difference is that the mortgage lender's name is not on the tax bill, even though it's the mortgage lender who's sending in the check. And believe me, the mortgage lenders want it that way. They don't want to be directly liable for the taxes, but they do often feel more comfortable paying the bill themselves by collecting the money ahead of time, each month by month. And in Indiana, we do it every 6 months, and then sending that money in. And then CLTs could do the same thing. In fact, CLTs might have to work it out with the mortgage lender as to who's doing it. Is the mortgage lender doing it on behalf of the CLT and because one thing that will be true, no doubt, is that the mortgage will apply both to the land and the house. Yeah. And so while the borrower on that mortgage loan is the owner of the house, the land will be just as subject to the thing, and that's the whole idea of the ground lease rider, where the whole lease is subordinated to the mortgage, but in exchange for that subordination, the CLT gets all kinds of notice and opportunity to save the property from foreclosure. That's essentially what it's about.
Hmm.
So
Seems like, I'm
yeah,
sorry,
sorry, Beth.
seems like it would be just to follow the same path. The mortgage lender would pay the tax bill, and then if it's the CLT that then reimburses the mortgage lender for the
And
tax
believe me,
bills paid forward.
it with 200 CLTs across the country, I would say 80% of them probably do it the exact same way, even if there's some variety. And you probably can find out these kinds of details. But sometimes it is better to talk to somebody who's actually operating a CLT,
Yeah.
you
Sure.
know, and just say, what do you do?
Yeah.
And then find out how much variety there is in their answers, and see whether it sometimes varies from lender to lender. But what do you do? And that's just, again, in that very technical thing of how do the payments actually get made.
So
So
is I guess I know you said you can do it in all kinds of ways, but based on what you're saying is normally the homeowner pays the CLT and the CLT pays the mortgage lender. Is that how
yeah, and I don't know, Pambana. I don't know if that's the way it goes. If the if the CLT just gets its ground lease fee and then just asks the homeowner or the lender to keep them in the loop about the taxes being paid directly from the homeowner to the lender. And then it's the lender who's actually making those payments. So that may be the way they actually choose to do it, is they allow the lender to escrow both components of the property tax, and the lender pays. And then I, as a homeowner, do get regular reports from my bank about what's going on with the escrow activity. So I not only see the money going in, but I see in my account when the money gets paid out to the thing. And so I don't know that a CLT would need to see copies of that, but they may have an arrangement they can at least check in and making sure that that's what's happening. CLTs definitely want to know as early as possible if there's any non-payment to the lender. And that could be just as, whether it's non-payment of the mortgage or non-payment of the property tax escrow, or if the lender also collects a casualty insurance, a fire insurance escrow. That's also something the CLT wants to know, just like the lender wants to know that the fire insurance is being paid regularly. And so there's just a lot of common things between a land trust and a lender in terms of seeing that go through. And so the lender may appreciate having another party who cares about the fact that the homeowner is doing there, somebody who with skin in the game. And so I can't see that, as long as the borrower signs off on it, why the lender wouldn't be quick to inform the CLT about any non-payment.
Yeah, Jim, that's a great idea. So I'm gonna ask that question. I've got some calls scheduled with Jeff in Minneapolis and Ashley in Houston.
That's awesome. How is Ashley doing? Because it was really great to see her just about this time last summer. I've read some stories since then about the troubles that Houston's been having, and it just seems like she must have been going through all of that even as we saw her. And so maybe just because I only saw her at dinner, I didn't realize, and maybe you got to hear a little more of the inside scoop, but I just really feel for what she's been going through. She's had to produce an incredible amount of housing, and it seems like there's been some real hardships along the way by putting out that much housing that fast.
So she is strong and going through it. So pushing through. I mean, I think they have, of course, any like organization that's relying on funding, that's relying on politics, is always going to have its hiccups. So I think they had some political challenges. I think they were on our mumbo. Yeah, Ashley was on our mumbo jumbo maybe a month or maybe 2 months ago, where she talked a little bit about it, about some of the what was TIF funding that the city was thinking about pulling to use for other pieces. So she seems to still be hanging in there and moving it forward.
Yay.
Now, of course, there's always politics.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, for sure. We'll let you know when I talk to her next too.
Good. Yeah, and Minneapolis, I also maybe, it's really too early to say, but I wrote a Supreme Court amicus brief for the folks in Hennepin County. So even as I was just turning to focus on community land trust, their tax foreclosure case that went before the Supreme Court sort of pulled me back towards tax foreclosure and some of the concerns about land banking. And so I did start a dialogue with the folks in Hennepin County, and that case will now continue because the Supreme Court did rule against Hennepin County, and so that case will continue. So I may still, I don't know if I'll be going up there, but it'll be interesting because I'm sure land trust and land bank is important to them as well, as it will be to you in seeing that.
Good stuff. So, and then the other piece that we're working with the city on is the resale formula and with the advisory board. So we recently started our advisory board meetings and are working through the resale formula. So right now we are, we haven't finalized it, but we're really looking at, Jason Webb has recommended a 2% fixed rate formula. And that was really based off of what he was looking at for the area median income. So one of the goals of the resale formula is to try and make it so that the houses are permanently affordable. So you kind of look at the trends with incomes and you look at the trends with the housing market and where the houses are going to be, hypothetically, what you're selling them for. And then 10 years later, 20 years later, 100 years later, is it still affordable if it appreciates at 2% every year? So that's kind of what we've been looking at. So he is recommending 2% because it provides permanent affordability. The average area median income over the last 10 years, it's about a 5%, like 4.8% increase. The general AMI in Indianapolis, area median income. So the goal is to have it below that, because things vary. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. Like, so keeping it, having enough wiggle room and breathing room between how incomes are rising with the appreciation of the property helps make sure it's permanently affordable, and maybe potentially become more affordable over time, theoretically.
Yes, and not tying it to an index, but just making it fixed rate. That's about as conservative as you can get. And the nice way you think about starting off conservative is that if you do decide that home buyers are trapped in their house by the formula, which is a possibility, that they would like to move to a bigger place, their incomes allow them possibly even to buy market rate homes, but they can't get the down payment because the home prices have gone up so much that the 2% is a factor. That may be unlikely with the differences we're talking about, but it really depends upon not only what goes up with incomes, but what goes on with land values in the area where they're likely to buy. If that's the reason people feel trapped, and you're saying that we're having more subsidies coming in, so we can actually buy down houses and not just buy down, subsidize new houses, but subsidize some of our resales, then you can always change the ground lease to be a more generous to the home buyer, the home seller in this case. Even if they agreed to something that was not as advantageous to us, if the community land trust is willing to agree to change it, they'll definitely agree to change it. And that way, if you do find that you wished you had been more generous to the home buyers, and you start offering new home buyers a more generous thing, you can choose to retroactively do that. And you can't go in the opposite direction. You can't do like we in Community Land Trust in DC, we had a shared appreciation formula where it was 25% of the growth. And I don't know that they didn't come to regret that 10 years later. This was in 1990 we
Yeah.
did this. And I don't know if 25% of the market value increase was too much, because DC prices did go crazy after that in Northwest DC. And so that may have put a lot of burden, you know, to try to keep that house affordable, where you have to fundraise just to pay off the departing home seller so you can make it affordable to a new home buyer. And that's without even fixing up the property. That's just to you know, afford the purchase, the resale price. So yeah, I certainly understand that with their experience in Grounded Solutions, that they might initially say start with the conservative formula.
Yeah, and also one of the other pieces, the ease to understand it and administer it. So
Yeah.
it takes about 2 seconds to explain
Yeah.
how it works. And you don't have to do it for the appraisal base. So that's another way of doing the resale formula, which Jim was mentioning, where you do an appraisal and 25% of the proceeds go to the homeowner, and
Yes.
land trust. And that it's hard to, people can't even know until you do an appraisal. Plus appraisal
That's right.
is also very racially discriminatory and very
That's right.
by the
That's
area.
right. Yes, that is something to think about. Yes. So, and then the other thing about the 2% formula is I'll caution you about is that when you talk about bringing community land trust to people who are existing homeowners, but maybe having difficulty keeping their home, that is more of a burden to try to make that work, because 2% as a growth in equity becomes more like rental housing. And if you take somebody who has a homeowner and you say, you're in danger of losing your home, how about this community land trust home model? Then you are making a more radical departure from the community land trust, from the regular market rate home ownership, even if that home ownership was in fact at risk because of their financial situation. And then you do, I think, have a greater risk of those folks saying, I was tricked into signing these CLT things, which has always been an issue, because some people, especially during the foreclosure crisis, some community land trust advocates saying we should be out there, you know, rescuing people from foreclosure, and others like myself were saying, be very careful with that. And the same may be true again for folks who are looking at community land trust as a form of down payment assistance. They say, we'd like to buy that house that's perfectly fine. It doesn't need any repairs, but we can't afford it. Can we get community land trust to buy it with us? Again, that could be more of a problem with the 2% approach, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. And it's not the same situation as the one I just described, the foreclosure rescue situation. But I know it was something at least that, you know, you've met folks who are talked about that community land trust as a sort of co-purchase down payment assistance thing instead of rehab or new construction. And then also the idea of folks who are longtime homeowners in the community and want to stay that way, but are in danger of not being able to stay that way.
That's different though from say you had a community land trust established, and I'm asking the question.
Sure.
That if someone left the home as, you know, the community land trust became the heir.
So you're talking about an existing community land trust house?
No, I mean, I'm saying that somebody has a house, they want to leave it to the land trust.
Oh, yes. You know, in other words, as somebody listed in the will.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
So people can always donate their property to charity. I don't know how common it is for community land trusts. And as long as that is a free donation, that is perfectly fine. Some family members may be upset about the donation and they may challenge it. They may say claim undue things, and that's something charities have to deal with all the time. but what's different is maybe any kind of contractual promise to give the to leave the house to the community land trust in a will. And that is also something I think some community land trusts have at least considered, is saying, you know, why don't you promise to leave the house to us in a will, and in return from that, you'll get some kind of benefit now. That's a different thing entirely, and that may be more complicated than any of the other two things I've talked about. But yeah, no, community land trusts are charities, and you know, somebody can leave their home just like they can leave their home to any charity, and it may be a way of avoiding estate tax. And yeah, and yes,
I know that Minneapolis, they were starting to get a lot more inquiries about people who didn't want to donate their home but sell it below market rate to a CLT buyer. So
Yes.
that's something that they were starting to do more of. Was,
yeah.
hey, well,
No,
if you're
there
willing
are,
to,
yeah.
if you're willing to take a 20% cut, are you willing to take a 20% cut below market? And if so, then they would start talking to them about what that would look like.
Yeah, yeah. And then that is not completely unlike the down payment assistance situation, in which you're really talking about a house that may not need a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be owned only by the community land trust or the community land trust development partner during the rehab period. And then it's a nice shiny new house, but it's somebody buying it at the time. It's really important that that person who's buying a house that is not yet owned by the community land trust, may never actually be owned solely by the community land trust, understand what it is they're buying. And maybe that education isn't completely different than the education that will be done with the Inglewood buyers.
Yeah.
But the Inglewood buyers are on pretty strong notice that everybody that's buying in that community, in that on those houses, are buying permanently affordable housing. And for the person who wants to sell their market rate home and make it available to a qualified home buyer, it's just going to have to be a little more clear.
Yeah. And would you do like some CLTs do, where they, as part of the orientation application process, they have to consult a lawyer that that he pays for, or that we have a pool or something?
And that's all helpful part of the education, and also something that any court would consider if somebody said I was tricked into it.
Jim, I know one of the things that Alan was looking at is for homeowners who have homes but either may be in jeopardy of losing them or need to repair them, and I guess could in exchange, I guess, for repairing them, put them into the CLT. I was wondering if you know of any models where, because you said you need to be very careful about that have worked.
Yeah, no, I don't know of any models, but I don't know many land trusts that are that operate currently now. The two I was involved in founding, the New Columbia Community Land Trust, I have not been in touch with them for over a decade, and so I don't know exactly what they're doing. I imagine they're managing the houses that they have, and that's it. They're not creating new housing, so I don't know if they're acquiring more properties. And Charm City Land Trust didn't have any houses when I left. They were a vacant lot land trust. That was in Baltimore. But they may now be doing more, but I still haven't been in touch with them. And so I think the best thing for you to do is to talk, especially to City of Lakes, because they seem to be doing a lot of different things, and they may know about those. And maybe some of the smaller land trusts, the ones that aren't citywide, that you might be in touch with to see if they're doing anything. Jason is obviously, I think, the best person to ask questions about different things, because both he and the Burlington Associates folks just are in touch with so many different land trusts. And they probably know about, they probably know or work with people who know about every little different thing that folks might be attempting. And again, what works and what might not work. But yeah, especially the idea of folks being able to stay in their home because they need repairs, that is just as big a concern as somebody who's losing their house because of a foreclosure threat. And it may be easier for the person who's making repairs for you to make that kind of enforcement. But there's been special laws passed in Maryland and in other states in the foreclosure crisis that target attempts to help people in foreclosure, because there's been so much predatory activity. And one might think that if you're a nonprofit, you would just be exempted from those laws, but it's not that simple. That you have to be aware of what how your state especially protects people in foreclosure from rescue scams. And community land trust is just not a rescue scam, but it doesn't mean that it's not subject to some of the same protections that rescue scams are facing.
Well, the road, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, anything else y'all want to talk about? Questions? Beth, do you want to share again the Habitat project your church is collaborating, partnering with Habitat on?
Yes, thank you. In fact, I pulled up the contract just now because I have some specific question with regards to our legal expertise here, if that makes sense. I mean, I read it as a layperson and as a congregant who we did vote to sell to Habitat 5 acres of our land to Habitat for Humanity on this past Sunday. Of course, yeah, it's good. There's a need for affordable housing in Hendricks County. You know, as most churches have experienced in the last years, decline in membership, etc. We're blessed with the fact that we had land. It's a good location. Of course, now that we have said we will sell it for the price, the whole process begins with the town of Avon and the governmental process to see if you can be, you know, planning commission says yes, no, all that good governmental stuff. So there's plenty of caveats with regard to whether that happens or not, and whether the contract goes through to the end, etc. But the part that I was very insistent as a congregant that be included was the fact that it needed to be long-term affordability. And my whole process of understanding has come through all of these discussions about community land trust. When I brought up the idea of community land trust in Hendricks County and the various organizations that were involved, some of them, of course, had not heard about community land trust. So there was a bit of a beginning of an education on community land trust, and some of the opportunities that have happened in Indianapolis for learning situations have been extended to people here in Hendricks County that have gone ahead and attended as such. So they've learned much in a short amount of time, which is wonderful. Yes, thank you. Of course, the way that it's being approached thus far is not a community land trust, but they did speak to long-term affordability, because I was so insistent that it shouldn't be just a one and done situation. Although Habitat would tell you, and that most of their folks who have sweat equity and purchase the home do not leave that home. In other words, they're not in it for resell and move on. They're looking more for, I guess, you know, first stability in life and staying through. And their percentages, according to them, indicate such. Anyway, the language that's included in this sale agreement, along with many other things, the one that speaks to affordability says that this attachment that talks about the subdivision land and the provisions pertaining to Avon Christian Church use of the land and facility right next to it, which is where our church footprint is, says attachment B will automatically become part of this agreement and specifically include a binding plan by Habitat for preserving long-term affordability of homes built on the subdivision, which may include the use of covenants accompanying the sale of the developed homes or other legal means to accomplish the intent of the plan. That's it in a nutshell. It
Yeah.
doesn't exclude community land trust, but it doesn't
No.
include it. I got the sense in speaking with Habitat that they had not, at least in central Indiana, been involved in a community land trust with homes that they had developed. But they were sensitive to the idea of long-term affordability and included it in this sale agreement.
Yeah.
That's what solidified my vote for yes to go ahead and sell the land. We have a lot of hurdles, along the way for the government, but it'll be interesting to see how, in the end, that does pan out.
Yes. Yeah. So they may look into different possibilities with that. The fact that it's a subdivision may help the covenant approach. So even the Inglewood fact that it in some ways is a subdivision, it might be a small subdivision. How many acres did you say?
It's 5 acres and they want
Yeah,
to.
5 acres. I mean,
they
that's
wanna-
probably significantly bigger than the Inglewood. Do you know how many acres the Inglewood property is, Alvin?
I don't remember. It's
Probably
probably
not
like
more than
20 lots.
3.
It's probably
Probably
like
not
20.
more. So like a city block. Gosh, what is a city block? I think a city block is 1 acre. And so this is probably about the size of a city block. So 5 acres would be 5 city blocks. That's what I believe.
It's going to be, their plan is to build single family homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They want 18 to 21 units in their initial planning. Of course, they can't do any of that until they get a final kind of like assistance from the government to determine if that's going to be feasible. But that was their thought.
So a city block is actually 4 square acres. So they may actually be more closer than I thought, but I'm not sure the Inglewood property is an entire city block. But yeah, whether it's big or small subdivisions, the fact that the owners of the properties may have a covenant relationship with each other, that may allow there to be legal agreements. It's just who could enforce such agreements.
Yeah, that's what
and
I
who's
was
going to be
gonna say.
motivated to enforce such agreements. That may be a complication, but it's these things can work, especially when most people do move every 20 years. And whether the covenants can go on longer than 20 years may be another complication. But what the agreement understands to be long-term affordability may vary.
Yeah. See, I didn't hear the word before to insist upon permanent affordability.
Yeah, no, and that's right. And they may have balked at that because they may not have been able to be sure of how they would guarantee affordability. When home funds operate, they see 15 years as a very important standard. Now more and more groups look towards 30 years as being an important thing. But beyond 30 years, it's really hard. And so community land trusts just kind of have this idea that we're going to form a nonprofit and that nonprofit is going to last forever. Generations after we're all dead, this nonprofit's going to be operating. And honestly, the community land trust experience over the last 50 years has shown that that's kind of arrogant to do that.
So, Jim, when the term long-term affordability is used with a covenant, it doesn't have to be specified how many years. Is that up to interpretation?
Well, so what Habitat did is promise the church long-term affordability, and both sides probably didn't specify that too much. But I believe Habitat's gonna give it a real try when they create the subdivision to create some kind of mechanism so that it won't be just the first homeowner that is a qualified home buyer, but the first generation, second generation, maybe third generation of home buyers will be things. Because if you have a subdivision,
that would make me happy. That would make
yeah,
me
exactly. And if they, and they may, you know, feel that this relationship to the church is important, since the church is going to continue to be its neighbor, that they may want the church to have some relationship to the people who live there, even if those people don't go to that church, you know.
Right.
And so there may be some, just at least some checking in with the church about that, about how that might go. And then they'll probably look at options about who might have standing to enforce that. Theoretically, the church might have standing to enforce those covenants, but that's in theory. And
Yeah,
that
but
might
on
be,
what basis? What basis? Because
yeah,
they
that
don't
is a
own the
good
land
question, on the
anymore.
basis of the fact that they own land nearby.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And so usually your covenants that are enforceable by nearby landowners are things like, oh, I'm not going to build a 10-foot tall building on this, even if zoning allows me to. Or I'm not going to carry on with selling liquor at all hours of the night on my property, even if zoning allows me to, or liquor license allows me to. So that kind of stuff, you can make promises to neighboring properties, just so people can feel good about allowing a subdivision to happen. And
Right.
all the kinds of things that you see about, you know, okay, the garages aren't going to face the street, and all that kind of stuff that you see in a lot of suburban homeowners, that's all covenants. And that's all to, in some ways, to allow the farmer to subdivide the land into smaller lots and have those homeowners feel good about buying properties in a place that doesn't have zoning yet, or it has zoning, but they want more than what zoning's offering them in terms of certainty that the person next door is not a crazy person who's going to do kind of crazy stuff with their house. And so affordability is a little different than all that, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. So Habitat, I think, is probably going to proceed in good faith, and they're not going to want to, you know, spend a lot of money on lawyers trying to figure out exactly how to do it. But, you know, if they do run into trouble, please do let them know about our clinic, because we've got Bloomington, we got Indianapolis. I had a land use planning student from Plainfield this past year. And so I learned a little bit about Plainfield from her. And I believe
Plainfield,
that's
Indiana?
Oh yeah, Plainfield, Indiana. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
At
that's
Notre
where
Dame.
I live. That's where I
I
live.
figured you might know of it at least, because I just pulled up Hendricks County on a map and I said, oh,
Yeah.
that's where she's from.
Yeah. That's where I live. And my planning people are pretty darn strong, let me tell you.
Yeah, that's right. No, I tell you, I don't, you know, just because she sees herself as having been born, and she's very young, but born in an area that was becoming rural and then a lot less rural because of what's going on with the airport and such.
Right. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and Beth, I talked to one of the Habitat staffers maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, and I know that they're working on, or at least he shared that they were trying to work on some kind of shared equity or long-term affordability, that it basically wasn't, you know, and this is what Jim told me a couple of years ago, it hasn't been a problem for them. For other habitats that are in markets that are crazy, like DC and Seattle, they've been collaborating with CLTs. Even Minneapolis Habitat collaborates with the CLT there, but they haven't really seen a need to, similar to what you said. But I think when the crisis, like the the real estate market went crazy, they started to say like, hey, we're handing homeowners like 200,000 in equity out the gate.
Right.
Can you justify that? We just put like $300,000 into this house, and they could sell it tomorrow, even if they don't.
Right.
So I think that's more what is starting to have them thinking, hey, maybe we should put something in place.
Yeah, we need to tighten it up. Exactly.
Yeah, Habitat was founded in '76, and right from the jump, they weren't about cutting the ribbon and moving on. They were always the lender for their homeowners, and that's what made them different. So they're used to having this ongoing relationship. And so that was just about the same time that community land trusts started working in cities. we had the Americas there, and both in Georgia too, is because Habitat for Humanity started in Americus, Georgia, and then the first community land trust was in Albany, Georgia, and so really about the same time. And so Millard Fuller's folks were in Koinonia, and that led to Habitat for Humanity, and then the folks in New Communities were coming out of the civil rights movement. And so, but it was really Cincinnati, since '79 was the first community land trust that was really an urban community land trust. And so, so they both had this approach where we're gonna stick with the homeowner and have a continuing relationship. It's just that the difference between being a mortgage lender and being somebody who actually supervises the resale. And Habitat for a long time was very resistant about being more than a lender. But of course, there's all kinds of habitats, and eventually they did start doing more with community land trust and doing more with resale things. But it did take a good 20, 30 years before that started to happen.
It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. It is great. Well, that's really great, Beth, and congratulations on that. That's very exciting that your church is going to be part, and it's going to be able to look at that new growth in its community and know that they made affordable housing possible.
Thank you. I think so too. And I have to say kudos to Kepra for giving all of the education freely and
Along with Jim.
graciously. Yeah. Yeah, well, Jim, of course, yeah, but I didn't know Jim at first. I only knew you.
Yeah, well, it's my students. Pambana and Alvin haven't even seen me like all year. It's like the year's half gone, and this is like the first time they're seeing me in 2023, basically. So, but they'll see me again, and I'm hoping maybe in August I might be able to come down there again if that works out with you guys. If you're not all,
yeah, please. Let us know anytime you'll be in town. Have you over?
Yeah, it would be great to see you.
Awesome. Well, we're at 7:10. Is there any last things people want to talk about before we close it out? All right, keep up.
Great. I will be following up with both of you to check in this summer. Apart from that, I have a great student named Aisha who's gonna. I think it's Aisha, maybe not Bree, but one of them, Aisha, I think. So I'll let her, I'll CC her and see about all the issues that didn't get done. This past
and
spring.
I think Paulette's gonna be sending you an email because I'm trying to follow up on the property tax.
Yes, I especially
separate properties getting that.
If you do get a notice, there could be a very
whatever
short window on that. Yeah, that's what I did ask her to follow up on, is to find out if Miss Paulette had heard about anything.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Good to see you, Jim. Good to see you, Beth.
Bye now.
Bye.